that carries AFR doesn't need to stop you. Go to AFR for American Family Radio, AFR.net, and the program will automatically begin to stream once you access the AFR.net, access the homepage there. You can also video and audio stream the program on our Focal Point Facebook page, that's Focal Point Bryan Fischer, or on our Focal Point YouTube channel. Email address, focalpoint@afa.net, on Twitter, and whenever Parler comes back, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Parler has been completely destroyed by the left. Not just disabled, but destroyed. They may or may not be able to rebuild their platform, but Parler is the social media alternative to Twitter. It's the conservative Twitter. I've been on there virtually since the beginning. So for months I've been on Parler. I send stuff out on Twitter, and then I immediately send it out on my Parler account. That entire platform, in fact, the company that is behind Parler has been basically destroyed. And whether they will be, I mean, it's a crime. You can't destroy a business without there being some legal consequence, but apparently in Joe Biden's America, you can. So anyway, you can follow me on Parler or on Twitter at Bryan J. Fischer. Want to remind you the Boy to Man book is available at afastore.net, and my brand new book, Urban Legends of the Constitution, Why Everything You've Heard About the Constitution is Wrong. That's available now at Amazon. All right, well, let's turn our attention to the Word of God. We are in the book of Judges. We are preparing for the coming of King David, the king of God's choice for the people of Israel. He's coming. But first of all, Saul had to be removed, and Saul did everybody a big favor by essentially removing himself from consideration as the king. Now, today we're in 1 Samuel 13, which gets us toward the end of Saul's life. And in the early part of this chapter, Saul is at war with the Philistines. We're told that Jonathan, his son, defeated the garrison of the Philistines at Geba with just 1,000 men. Everybody heard about it in Israel. Everybody heard about it in Philistia. People knew the Philistines were not going to take this lying down. So the people were in a panic because they were afraid of what the Philistines will do. And sure enough, verse 5, the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, like sand on the seashore in multitude, to come up against Saul and Jonathan and their forces. And then we're told what happened in verse 6. When the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, they saw the hordes of 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen and troops descending on them like a plague of locusts. When the men saw this, saw that they were in trouble, the people hid themselves in caves and in holes and in rocks and in tombs and in cisterns. And some Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan, went to the other side of the Jordan, get as far away from the scene of battle as they possibly could. But a lot of the people hung with Saul. They followed him, it says in verse 7, they followed him trembling. In other words, the people that Saul was leading, or supposed to be leading, were on the edge of panic, and Saul knew it. It says in verse 8, he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. Samuel said to Saul, look, I want you to wait 7 days. I'll be there on the 7th day. I will be there, and we will take care of this nasty Philistine business. But on the 7th day, Samuel still had not showed up, and the people were scattering from Saul. So he saw that he was losing his truth. He was losing his people. So when Samuel did not come to Gilgal to offer the sacrifices to God that would have given them victory in battle, Saul offered a burnt offering himself. He was not a priest. He was not allowed. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, had to be from the tribe of Levi to be a priest and offer sacrifices. He wasn't. Wrong tribe. But Saul just panicked and offered the burnt offering himself, something that only a priest was allowed to do. And we're told in verse 10, as soon as he finished, Samuel came. Now the lesson here from this, Remember, Samuel said, wait 7 days. Don't go off prematurely. Don't go off half-cocked. I'm coming. I will be there. 7 days I'll be there. But as we got into the 7th day, Saul began to panic because his people were drifting away from him. They were departing him. They were heading for the hills and the cisterns and the caves. And I may be right now, get to the application here. Right now, I may be talking to somebody in this listening audience right now, and you are up against it. You're running out of time. You're afraid that you will lose it if you don't act right now. You're afraid of what you will lose unless you take immediate emergency action. And there's something inside you, there's a voice inside you telling you that what you're thinking about doing is not the solution. You feel uneasy about it. You know it's probably not what you should be doing, but you don't see an alternative. So you get on the edge of panic, on the edge of a meltdown. You feel like you have to do something, so you grab for the first life preserver that comes along. And that was the situation that Saul was in. He grabbed for the first life preserver that floated by. But in verse 11 and 12, this is what Saul did in the way of excuses. When you get caught doing something you know you shouldn't have done, we always try to make excuses for ourselves. And they're pretty lame because they come up with them on the fly. So Saul admits in verse 11, I have not sought the favor of the Lord, and I forced myself to offer the burnt offering. I really didn't want to. I held off, and finally I just forced myself to do it. So he's trying to sanctify this excuse. He's trying to dress it up. He's trying to purify it, but it was impulsive and it was disobedience to God. So this is what Samuel says to him quite bluntly. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord. If you had, the Lord your God would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. And instead of talking about David and his descendants, we today would be talking about Saul and his descendants who sat upon the throne of Saul. So Saul had everything writing on this. So realize here's a decision, and we may get into a situation like this where you know you should wait, that you're acting prematurely, you're inclined to make an impulsive decision, to rush into something before you are ready to make that kind of commitment. And there was a moment here in Saul's life where this decision would affect the course of his life forever. The rest of his life, the arc of the rest of his life was going to be changed and damaged forever because of this one decision. So this is why what we're to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we are to wait. We are to commit ourselves to God day in and day out, and we are to wait. We are to remember that God is seldom early, but he is never late. So don't ask until you've got don't act until you've got a release from God to act. In the meantime, you trust and you hope and you cling to the hope that you have in God until he shows up. So that's why we commit ourselves to God every day, day in and day out, because we never know when we're going to come up against a decision that may change the arc of our life forever. So again, this is the application I want to make. No matter how much pressure we're under, no matter how tempting it is, no matter if it looks like it's the thing that will get me out of this jam, it's always foolish to disobey God. It is always foolish to run out ahead of God, no matter how good our justification sounds to us. Now, Samuel said to Saul, look, you could have had a kingdom over Israel that would have lasted for the rest of history. That was in your grasp. But because you got impatient, you ran out ahead of God. That's gone, and that's gone forever, because God is going to replace you. He, verse 14, has sought out a man after his own heart. Man, I just love that. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. Talking here about David. Now, the point here simply is it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. David surely wasn't. But it does mean that his heart was for God. His heart was after God. That's what God was looking for. The people weren't. They were looking for an Adonis who looked like a king. God was looking for a guy an ordinary man who had a heart for God, whose heart was after God, and found him in David. All right, well, let's take these things to prayer if you'd be kind enough to join me. Sovereign Lord, as we read this story, we are sobered by the way in which Saul's lack of patience cost him an enduring dynasty. You had instructed him through Samuel to wait, but he panicked when he saw the people scattering and offered an offering which was not his place to do. And we also see the way in which he tried to excuse his behavior. Lord, I pray for myself and everyone right now listening to the sound of my voice. I pray that we will choose to wait on you, even when we are in trouble and hard-pressed and fearful, as Saul and Israel were at this time. Remind us that although you are seldom early, you are never late. Teach us to wait for you, to deliver us at your appointed time, even when everything in us wants to panic and take matters into our own hands. You teach us in your word that faith is a refusal to panic, even when things seem to be falling apart around us. May we choose to exercise this day that kind of faith. Keep us from being foolish and running out ahead of you and failing to keep what you have commanded us. I pray instead that we will keep your commands, believing that as we do, you will establish us and make us secure. We know that you seek out men after your own heart to entrust with great responsibility. May each of us be that kind of a man. This we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Listen to Focal Point on American Family Radio. We will be right back. Bryan Fischer is my name. Stay with us.
This is Focal Point with Bryan Fischer on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. And I am Bryan Fischer. Alongside me, Jeff Reed and Rob Gardner, who, as they say in the military, is short. That's what they say when you're getting close to your term of enlistment. You're ready to be demobilized and returned home. That is our own Rob Gardner. All right, well, let's turn our attention to content of the day if we can. I'm going to kind of hit some sound bites here right away. Just get these in. And maybe, I think before we do this, let's start with the Reed Report, because Jeff is going to profile for us a hero of mine in church history. Maybe somebody that you have not heard about, but he's one of the real heroes of the faith. So, Jeff, what do you got for us?
You know, honestly, a lot of us could do a lot better at studying history and learning from history. I hadn't heard of Thomas Becket before this, but just recently, Donald Trump did a proclamation and spoke about this on the anniversary of his death. Apparently, Thomas Becket was a former Archbishop of Canterbury, and he stood up to King Henry VIII over the issue of church and state, and his bold stance ended up in him being killed for his stance.
And that was back in the 11th century, I believe, wasn't it?
1170.
1170, correct. So 12th century, but close enough. So
yeah, well, in the proclamation, Donald Trump wanted to remind us that Beckett's death and his stance changed the course of history, because eventually it brought about numerous constitutional limitations on the power of the state over the church across the West. And it serves as a powerful and timeless reminder to every American that our freedom from religious persecution is not a mere luxury or accident of history, but rather an essential element of our liberty.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that, Jeff. You know, and the Magna Carta was produced in 1215. So just some 30, 40 years after this event, when Thomas Becket stood up to the king and stood his ground even at the cost of his life. And then in 1215, the nobles in England, they confronted the king and said, look, we have rights and we're going to insist that you respect them. You're the king, we honor you as our monarch, but you cannot trample our fundamental rights. Now, England doesn't have a constitution, but they do have the Magna Carta. And that was that was a majestic document, and it provided protection for the nobles in England from the oppression of the king.
Now, King Henry VIII was basically establishing the Church of England as a state institution. Is that right?
Well, yeah, that was part of it. I mean, but it was more than that. It went to control of lands and all kinds of things, as well as the control of religious liberty. But Thomas Becket knew, look, we need to protect religious liberty, the freedom of members of the clergy to speak the truth, declare the gospel, even to the king, if necessary. So,
amen.
And good for Donald Trump. Good for Donald Trump for honoring him. All right, well, let's grab some sound bites and get into some of the content of the day from the political world. Let's begin in clip number 1. This happened this morning on the House floor. There's an effort to launch impeachment proceedings, the second impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump. Remember, he's already been impeached once, was not convicted. Remember, an impeachment is like it's like a indictment in the world of civil law. So the president is accused in an impeachment, but he's not convicted until the trial is held and the vote is taken. So the Democrats in the House are trying to impeach him again, and they tried this morning. Steny Hoyer, Majority Leader, tried to do it this morning. Here is what happened. Clip number 1.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on the Judiciary be discharged from further consideration of H-Res 21 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
Clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 21, resolution calling on Vice President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the Cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president.
For what purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
I object.
Objection is heard. Pursuant to Section 5A1B of the House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned to 9 a.m. tomorrow.
So the House is trying to impeach Donald Trump again. Their first step is they're trying to challenge Mike Pence. Look, what you've got to do is you got to use the 25th Amendment to declare that Donald Trump is unfit to discharge the duties of his office, and he could be removed from office if his cabinet agrees. So they're trying to get Mike Pence to lead the charge to use the 25th Amendment to disable President Trump. It had to be done by unanimous consent because they are running out of time. Couldn't get it. One Republican congressman stood up and objected, and that was it. That stopped the run toward using the 25th Amendment. So now that's not going to happen. Now impeachment is the thing that is left on the table. You know, and Alan Dershowitz is a legal scholar. He's on the faculty at Harvard University School of Law, or was. I think he's emeritus now. But he says this process of trying to impeach Donald Trump again, and it's very important that you get this. Listen to this very carefully because what Alan Dershowitz says is absolutely correct, absolutely true, and very important. He says that impeaching the president, that is basically indicting him, then you got to have the trial, but impeaching him would violate the Constitution. They're doing it in the name of the Constitution, but what they would be doing would be violating the very Constitution they claim they're trying to protect. He says it's unconstitutional because you cannot, according to the Constitution, impeach a president unless he has committed high crimes and misdemeanors. And Donald Trump has not done that. The worst thing he's done is give a speech to his followers in which he urged them to make their voices heard peacefully and patriotically. So what Donald Trump, this is what Dershowitz is saying, when Donald Trump gave that speech, all he was doing was exercising his First Amendment right to free speech. That's what the First Amendment's freedom of speech plank protects. What it protects is not speech of all kinds, doesn't protect pornography or profanity, for instance, doesn't protect pornography as people want it. It just protects political speech. Speech is the words that are actually coming out of your mouth. So if the words are coming out of your mouth are about matters of politics, then you are protected. The government cannot interfere with your right to deliver that kind of speech. And so Dershowitz says this would be flatly illegal. You know, Jeff, did you want to add something?
No, I was just thinking if Donald Trump really did incite violence or an insurrection of any type, don't you think we'd see that section of the video on a continuous loop on CNN, MSNBC, and all the other networks? I mean, it just doesn't exist.
Right. Because if it did, you're right. If it's, that's we'd be hearing.
Yeah.
So that what they can't do, obviously, and Jeff's got a brilliant point here, what they can't do is just run a loop after loop after loop of Donald Trump telling his supporters, I want you to make your voices heard. Just be sure you do it peacefully and patriotically. That doesn't do them any good at all. In fact, it completely obscures their whole deal. So Dershowitz saying, look, you can't even blame the president for the actions of other people. What you prosecute is you prosecute the actors, the people that are actually doing the stuff. You prosecute those people. You don't prosecute the speaker. So the speaker, one who is speaking, has a constitutional right to advocate, not to incite, which President Trump did not do. Your constitutional right to advocate, which is what President Trump did. He did not incite. He said, make your voice heard, but peacefully and patriotically. Last thing he said to them before they went down to the Capitol building and just started losing control and beating cops over the head and stuff like that. So what he's saying is, look, if they get away with impeaching the president here, in other words, bottom line, you cannot impeach a president for exercising one of his constitutional rights. That's the bottom line here. You cannot impeach a president for exercising one of his constitutional rights. Freedom of speech is a constitutional right. If the president is exercising that, he cannot be impeached for that. And if they wind up being able to impeach him, then Dershowitz says this is going to shred the Constitution, because what this will do is it will weaponize the power of impeachment, and people will start using it against the party that's out of power will start using this one president after another. So again, Nancy Pelosi calling on Mike Pence to suspend the president. If you won't do it, the vice president doesn't rise to the challenge, we are going to impeach him. And she wrote her letter and she signed it prayerfully, Nancy Pelosi. So Nancy Pelosi says, I have been praying about this. I'm doing this prayerfully. I have prayed to my God, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is not the same God that you and I pray to. But she says, I've been praying to whoever it is I pray to, and he's given me the green light to do this. So we'll see. They just don't have enough time. Senator Mitch McConnell said, look, with the Senate calendar, the earliest we could start the process of impeachment is January 19. And Donald Trump departs into history on January 20. So there's no time to do a complete impeachment thing. But the left is out there still getting even with Trump. They're going after him, still trying to neutralize him, take him out. They have stripped his club, Bedminster in New Jersey. It had been awarded the 2022 PGA Championship. There's 4 golf tournaments that are called major tournaments, the 4 biggest tournaments of the year. His golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, had been granted the 2022 PGA Championship, a real feather in the cap, and they've said, now we're going to yank it. We are not going to do that because the president incites violence. Here's a pilot had a group of Trump supporters on his flight, an American Airlines flight. I want to make sure you know which airline this was. American Airlines pilot had a group of Trump fans on his plane as they're getting ready to leave Washington, to leave Ronald Reagan Airport or Dulles or wherever they were flying from and go back home. It was going to go into Phoenix. And they were so sitting there waiting in the plane, and after a while they started chanting USA, USA, USA. Plane hasn't moved. They're sitting there on the tarmac. So the captain came on the intercom and said, if you guys don't stop, if you keep this up, I'm going to fly this plane to Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm going to drop you like a hot rock in Kansas, in the middle of the country, in the middle of nowhere. So you better shut up or you're going to get dumped on the tarmac in Kansas City. So, a pastor was on the plane, Greg Locke. He says, look, if you don't think they're after our freedoms, you're fooling yourself. He said, the pilot said again, I'll put this thing down in the middle of Kansas and I will dump people off. I don't care. We will do whatever it takes. If that's what it takes, we will do it. Meanwhile, while all this is going on in D.C., an Antifa group, you probably didn't read about this, probably never heard about this, an Antifa group, which was armed with baseball bats, with bottles, and with chemical sprays, attacked a group of Trump supporters at a demonstration in San Diego. They threw glass bottles, they threw rocks, they threw eggs at a line of police officers attempting to maintain order. So again, the Democrats are just aghast. They're apoplectic at the way the Trump supporters treated the police. And here you have these Antifa folks in San Diego throwing glass at them, throwing glass bottles at them, throwing rocks at them, and throwing eggs at them. So anyway, that's what's going on at the same time, opposite ends of the country. And by the way, from Portland, things have not died down. We had a lot of attention on Portland back last year, but they're still going on in Portland. You haven't read about them because the talking snake media now, they know that this looks bad, especially now that we want to try to take Trump out because of violence. We can't afford to report on these Black Lives Matter assaults, these Black Lives Matter riots, these Antifa riots. We got to keep a lid on that. Nobody can find out about that because that's bad for our cause. Well, the Antifa folks made their way to a suburb of Portland called Tigard. According to local police, there were 100 left-wing terrorists. They blocked traffic. They defaced public and private property while on their way to the police station, where they broke windows, spray painted the building, and committed other acts of total mayhem. And we'll get to the parlor thing about the shutting down of Trump on Twitter and everything. But let's remember that we had riots in D.C. from May through the start of June, and nearly 1,000 police officers in a matter of weeks were injured. By whom? Not by Trump supporters, by BLM and by Antifa. And some of these attacks, these acts of destruction, urban destruction, were actually directly led and incited by Democrat leaders. One of the rallies in Portland, anti-fascist anarchists murdered a pro-Trump demonstrator by the name of Jay Danielson, and they celebrated his death. He is an expletive-deleted Nazi. Our community held its own, said one woman. Oregon Governor Kate Brown blamed the violence on Trump. We have David Dorn, who was a retired police officer, black individual. He was killed. And another man, an unarmed Chicago father, were fatally shot during lootings that erupted after the George Floyd death back in May. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Bryan Fischer. Bryan Fischer.
Welcome back to Focal Point, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media.
And the slowest roadrunner.
I talked about Parler at the beginning of the program. That's Twitter for conservatives. That program has been shut down. I mean, that company has been shut down. They may not survive. You go to Parler today. I tried to sign on to Parler to send out a parlay, is what it's called. Couldn't even access the site. It's down. It's completely down. And the CEO, a guy by the name of John Mates, said that his social media company has been dropped by virtually all of its business alliances after Amazon, Apple, and Google ended their agreements with the social media service. Every vendor, from text message services to email providers to our lawyers, all ditched us on the same day. These bans could put our company out of business. He said, look, this is an assault on everybody. Not just an assault on me, but it's an assault on everybody. I've got a clip with John Mace. Let's go down to clip number 4. Here's the CEO of Parler. Remember, Twitter has already banned Trump for life. Facebook has banned him for life. Google has put a limit on Donald Trump. They're out to squash him like a big bug. Just squash him to nothing till stuff starts oozing out on the pavement. That's what they want to do to President Trump. So here is what the Parler CEO, John Mates, had to say to Maria Bartiromo about these regressives, as I call them. Clip 4.
They all worked together to make sure at the same time we would lose access to not only our apps, but they're actually shutting all of our servers off tonight, off the internet. So they made an attempt to not only kill the apps, but to actually destroy the entire company. And it's not just these 3 companies. Every vendor from text message services to email providers to our lawyers all ditched us too on the same day.
Ditched us on the same day. Let's go back to clip number 2. This is Ted Cruz responding to Joe Biden, comparing him and Josh Hawley to Joseph Goebbels. Now, you'll notice that Joe Biden mangles the pronunciation. It's pronounced Goebbels. It looks like Goebbels, but it's not. It's Goebbels, but that's how Joe Biden pronounces it. Not sure what he's doing out there, just reading stuff off the teleprompter. No idea even what he's saying. But Ted Cruz reacting to this comparison by Joe Biden of him and Senator Hawley to Joseph Goebbels, who was their minister of propaganda, comparing him to Goebbels just because they had stood for electoral integrity, just because they made an effort to protect the integrity of the vote of their constituents. Here's what Ted Cruz said, clip number 2.
Trump said that before he ran.
That's
If
Biden.
you say it enough, I'm going to convince you. I'll say it enough. The press is bad. The press is bad. The press is bad. The press is bad. If he's the only one saying it, that's one thing. But the acolytes that follow him, like Cruz and others, they are as responsible as he is.
Okay, so that's Joe Biden linking Joseph Goebbels to Josh Hawley and to Ted Cruz. Now, you can tell who the left hates. And see, what they're trying to do, the whole purpose of this impeachment effort, which is not going to succeed, but the whole purpose of it is to impeach Donald Trump. He won't even be in office when they impeach him. I don't even think you can impeach a guy that's not in office, because the purpose of impeachment is to remove a malefactor from office. He won't even be in office. I don't even think constitutionally you could make a case that you could even impeach a president who's not in office. If the purpose of an impeachment is to remove him from office, well, he did that himself when he walked out of the White House and let you get sworn in. So it's not going to work. But the whole purpose, ladies and gentlemen, is to keep President Trump from running for president in 2024. That's the reason. That's the purpose here. They do not want President Trump to run in 2024, which he could do. You can serve 2 elected terms as a president. We've had one president in our history who served 2 terms as bookends to somebody else who served for 4 years in the middle. So it can be done, and it has been done. You know, and Dershowitz talked about how this is just trampling on our Constitution. You would think that the Democrats and the left, all they can talk about here is the Constitution. We got to do impeachment. We got to use the 25th Amendment. You would think that they would be very unhappy at the way the Constitution is getting ready to be mangled and misused. Let's listen to their response. Clip number 3. See how distraught they sound.
So the president, he has been kneecapped by Twitter. He can no longer use this account to do all of the various and sundry things that he does on a regular basis. He is, for all intents and purposes, banned at the moment from this very powerful social media platform.
This is a moment in Silicon Valley history, as well as a moment in political history. And this has significance all around the world, Wolf. So many world leaders use Twitter to communicate. But this is a historic moment where Twitter has stepped in and said, no, that world leader, the United States president, is too dangerous to use our platform.
Okay, so they're just giddy. They are beside themselves, which tells you that Trump did an enormous amount of damage to the left-wing cause, the regressive cause, using his Twitter account. An enormous amount of damage. In other words, if he wasn't damaging the regressive cause, they wouldn't care. If he was on some place like Gab or something like that, they wouldn't care. But he has inflicted an enormous amount of damage on the regressive cause through what he does on Twitter, and they're trying to strike back. So that was Gentleman Jim Acosta and Bryan Alcastelter weighing in on the president and Twitter shutting them down. By the way, Twitter, you know what Twitter counts on is they count on eyeballs. They're like every other social media platform. They depend on eyeballs. They want eyeballs looking at their pages. They want eyeballs reading their stuff. Because on the same pages where people are reading their stuff are advertisements. That's where they make their money. People put their advertisements on Twitter. So while you're reading stuff on Twitter, you're also seeing the advertisements, basically commercials. So they're just hurting themselves. And the market reflected that today. Twitter is down 11% this morning. Just in one morning, they're down 11%. That's $4 billion. So Jack Dorsey just took a $4 billion hit to the wallet this morning. Now here's Glenn Greenwald, clip number 5. This guy kind of specializes in tracking intelligence and stuff like that. And he says something that I believe is absolutely true here. And listen to this, because this is very sobering. Glenn Greenwald is a guy that's over on the left. He's not one of us. He's not a conservative, but he is very concerned about free speech. Now, here's what he has to say about what Twitter and Facebook and Google are doing to you and to me. Clip number 5.
Well, one thing I think that we're clearly seeing is the initiation of a new war on terror, which I don't say lightly. I say that because the Biden administration, what will be the Biden administration in about a week, is saying explicitly that they want, first of all, a new law to further criminalize domestic terrorism, even though every act that constitutes domestic terrorism is already criminalized. What they want to do is increase their power to monitor political groups, to infiltrate them, to criminalize activities that currently are not criminalized, nor should they be.
So you have a tiny handful, Greenwald went on to say, a tiny handful of tech oligarchs who, listen to this, are more powerful than any nation state. He's saying that Twitter and Facebook and Google, you combine them, they are more powerful than any country in the world. That's the kind of heft and the kind of power that they have. They get to determine what we hear, what we can speak, what is true, what is false, with zero accountability and zero transparency. Now, Molly Hemingway, clip number 6, she's a guest opinionator on Fox News, which, by the way, Fox News is going seriously into the tank. I read this morning that last week there were no Fox News programs, I mean zero, as in nada, zip, zero, none, who are in the top 10 in the ratings this past week. And only 2 of their shows were in the top 20. So they're shipping water, ladies and gentlemen, and it's because they joined the hate Trump crusade. They're giving oodles of time to folks like Chris Wallace to dump noxic waste all over the top of Trump's head, and it's not working. It's costing them viewers. They're trying to reshuffle their daytime lineup to make some major changes in their daytime lineup. That's a sign of desperation. If what you've got is working, you don't change it up. You know, if your 3, 4, 5 hitters are getting the job done, you don't mess with the heart of your lineup. It's only when they're not producing, when you don't get the run production, that you start tampering with your lineup. Well, that's what Fox News is doing, what they did today. They're tampering with their lineup because it's not working. Now, here is Molly Hemingway talking about the nauseating display of hypocrisy that we see from the Talking Snake media, clip 6.
The media have generally praised takeovers of state capitals, whether that was in Wisconsin in 2011, Texas in 2013, which they widely praised. Also, the attacks of the Kavanaugh confirmation process, in which the media and Democrats actually encouraged the disruption of the proceedings there, the attack on the Supreme Court, not to mention this entire summer of rage that we saw, the media not just coddling, but enabling and supporting, and other people such as Democrats, working to bail out rioters who took over cities. Dozens of people were killed. There was billions of dollars in damage. There were attacks on federal courthouses, federal buildings, state and local buildings, churches, businesses.
So Molly Hemingway pointing out the string of mayhem and property destruction that happened in the wake of Antifa, basically since 2011. Remember, they took over the Wisconsin state capitol. That was back when they were having some showdown over teachers. And remember, Governor Scott Walker clamped down and said, I'm not going to get pushed around on this. And so they shut the teachers invaded the Capitol. I mean, they took it over, just like Trump supporters took over the U.S. Capitol yesterday. Same difference. They didn't attack anybody in Wisconsin. Wasn't any property destruction. Nobody died. So it's different, and that's a big difference. But it was the same idea. They took over, physically took over the Capitol in Madison, Wisconsin. And so that's what happened yesterday. And Molly Hemingway saying the left praised it when the Democrats did it in 2011 when they took over the state capitol. Remember Wendy Davis, abortion Barbie? She was leading campaign rallies in the rotunda of the Texas Capitol building. So again, and the left praised them for that, saluted them, the power, the courage, the daring to do it. Now, one of the things you can count on is you will have Republicans jumping on the bandwagon. Lindsey Graham, that guy, I mean, I'm not going to say what I would like to say about him, but to say that he lacks courage would be the understatement of the decade. So Lindsey Graham, he's sitting there waiting in the weeds to see how all of this is shaking out, and he sees that public opinion is siding against the protesters, so he came out yesterday or today with this emphatic denunciation of the protesters. Waited till the coast was clear, waited until he wasn't going to get shot walking across the town square, and launched a missile. But you can count on other Republicans to pile on. They will jump on the Trump supporters and accuse them, condemn them, criticize them. Listen to what Meghan McCain, this is the daughter of Senator John McCain, listen to what she wants done with these Trump supporters from the Capitol. Clip 7.
I just think we need to treat the domestic terrorists the way we do actual terrorists. I think we need to consider all possibilities. I'm not against sending these people to Gitmo, and that may sound extreme. These are domestic terrorists who attacked our own republic. They should be treated the same way we treat Al-Qaeda.
So let's throw them in Gitmo. They're American citizens, so they can't legally be thrown in Gitmo. That's for terrorists, like the guys that are responsible for 9/11. Those are the people that went there. But she wants to lock American citizens up, ignore and deny all of their constitutional rights. Let's just throw them in Gitmo. and let them suffer there. Now, here's Joe Scarborough, clip number 8. And this is what he wants to happen to Trump, clip 8.
There's a second penalty that a lot of people don't think about all the time. We know that if you're convicted in the Senate, having been impeached in the House, you're removed from office. But the Senate can levy a second penalty, which is to forever disqualify, to forever bar somebody who's been impeached and convicted from ever holding office again. And if you could defeat that, simply by resigning, you would sort of make the whole thing a nullity. And that doesn't make sense. So to your question, Joe, Trump can be impeached in the House. He can be convicted in the Senate if you have enough votes, and then he can be barred subsequently from ever holding office again.
And that's the end game, because the impeachment rules in the Constitution provide that one of the penalties you can assess is to prohibit that person ever from holding public office again. That's what they want to do here. We'll be right back tomorrow with more on Focal Point. See you then.